Look at all the gorgeous faces. Hello, everyone. You're all looking wonderful and chipper and happy and shining like always. So here we go. I have got the fabulous Rich Miller here, and he's going to spend an hour letting us pick his brain and get all the juicy gossip from his podcast. And Rich and I go way, way back because an author that I chased a long time ago, just purely not to do his book because it's a male narrator, but because I loved his book, chose Rich as his narrator for another book. And I kind of did a little blurb on it. And the fact that Rich, the reason it became very quickly clear why everyone loves Rich Miller. Because he's a gentleman and he's lovely. And since being Facebook friends with Rich, all those times that, you know how we're all friends with each other. We all have hundreds of friends in this industry and we're all busy. And Rich is busier than anyone I've ever known. Plus he has his podcast. But Rich always shows up at those times when something's gone horribly wrong or you're very, very upset. And he's always got a kind word. And he always says just the right thing in that lovely way of his. So he's one of those people that you value. I know we all know each other just on Facebook and social media, but I value Rich. Getting to know Rich is one of the good things about this gig. So it's fabulous having you here, Rich.
Daniela, you're going to make me cry. You are too kind.
I speak the truth. And not only that, before I launch into, I want to know all about the Speakeasy. I want to know all about the podcast and everything. But before I launch into that, I'd like to hear about your journey to becoming a narrator. Sure. How did you become a narrator? What did you start off as, and how did you end up here?
So it actually goes way, way back, like 45 years ago. Actually, I know that sounds goofy, but I was a voracious reader when I was a kid. We used to have these things. I don't know about where you grew up or where other people grew up, and I can't actually remember the name of it now, but we got this thing in school. I think it was once a month. It may have been once every 2 weeks where you could order books.
Yes.
And you remember that?
Yes.
I wish I could remember the name of that program, but all
it was
I'm
like
thinking
heaven.
is, yeah. And so what would happen is we would get those and I would take it home and I would go over it and my parents would say that they would buy me, these books. And the box would come from this company and the teacher would open it up and she would say, okay, here's one for Bobby and here's one for Sue and here's two for Jimmy. And then what was left in the box was for me because it was like 15 books, right? And so I used to read just voraciously when I was a kid. And at some point, it seems to me I was about 10 years old, 10 to 12, somewhere in there. I got this idea that it would be fun to kind of read and act out these books that I was reading, certain ones. Of course, not everything would be a good choice for my family after dinner. And so I asked my parents if I could do this, kind of turning the tables on parents reading to their kids, right? So I asked my parents if I could do this, and they said, okay. I think they were kind of thinking, why would you want to do that? But okay. And so these kids' books that I still love, I've actually gone back to read them, not all that long ago, that were stories that had characters and they had voices and I would act them out. And I actually really loved doing that. So I didn't do it for all that long, but I think it's sort of, it's just stuck with me. It's one of those experiences that you have where you say, I think this would be fun, and it works out and it is fun. And so you have a good memory of it. Yeah. So later in life, when I got into acting, I was, in my mid-30s by the time I actually got into acting. I'd never done any before that.
What were you doing before that? What did you?
High tech. I was in databases.
So, like what we all did, the get a job, son kind of thing.
Yeah. And it was a good fit. I mean, I'm very analytical, and so everything to me is data. And then databases. Okay, well that's a good fit, and it really was. But it wasn't something that I just loved doing. It's just something that I happened to kind of work into, and it worked out okay. And then I got into acting and thought, wow, this is great. Being on stage, getting to act this stuff out and play, and this is fun. And so then after that, I tried to get into voiceover. And while I was doing that, I thought, well, a good thing for practice to keep me in front of a mic would be books. And so I volunteered for, at the time it was recording for the blind and dyslexic, which is now Learning Ally. And I volunteered for Books Aloud, which is a local organization in San Jose that also distributed books to the entire country. I don't think international, but they had a program where if you were visually disabled, you could write in and you would get free books. And so I volunteered for both of those, and then the voiceover thing it didn't work out because I didn't know what I didn't know. I wasn't marketing and I wasn't really making much money. So I went back to high tech. When we moved out here to Arizona, I got back into voiceover, and books just felt like the right fit. And so a friend of mine told me about ACX. I looked into it. I signed up. I did nothing for like a year, didn't even think about it. Then I thought, well, maybe I should, go ahead and look into this. And I did. And then it just sort of took off, and it continued to feel like a good fit.
At what point did you think, wow, I'm a narrator?
I don't know. I'll let you know when that happens. No, I would, boy, I guess I would say, because I also had a commercial demo done, and a new commercial and a new narration demo done. I guess I would say after I had done 5 or 10 books, I probably felt like, yeah, I think I was right. I think this is a good fit. And so I'll continue to maybe try to do this other stuff. But yeah, I guess audiobook narration, yeah, I guess that's going to work for me. So probably 5 or 10 books. And
5 or 10 books.
I don't think I felt like really comfortable until I was probably up to about 20 or 30.
And with your tech background, I bet that was a big advantage with getting the head around, because that's everyone's big learning curve.
It is. And I know that there are a lot of people who have a lot of trouble with it. And I feel really fortunate that for me, it was never difficult. But I think the hardest thing I ever did for voiceover was I got Ableton Live for free when I got I bought an M box for my interface back 18, 20 years ago. Ableton Live came with it, and I said, well, it's free. So I booted it up and I learned how to use it. It's a terrible tool for voiceover, especially for long form narration. But I made it work, and I think that the tech background is why I was able to do stuff like that relatively quickly.
So what challenges did you have? Like, what was your big thing that you had? We all have something we have to overcome, like procrastination, imposter syndrome, or whatever they call it. What was your thing that you had to struggle to get over?
I would say probably all of the things that most everybody else would say as well. And I would say imposter syndrome is a big part of it, even today. And so, a lot of people say, I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine who's just barely getting into audiobooks right now, but who has an acting background. And I was saying, a lot of people say, oh, I wish I could, I wish my first 50 books, they would just take off of Audible. I just hate them. I hate them. They're terrible. I was terrible. It was no good. And I think, I understand that sentiment, and sure, I would make different choices, but given where I was at the time, I actually think they're not bad. And yet, I will still listen to something that I just did this year, and if I listen to, a chunk of it, I'll say, God, why does anybody listen to this crap? And it's not the sound of my voice. I mean, I know that everybody, when they first get into VO, they're like, ooh, my voice, it sounds so weird. I got over that years ago. That's not a problem. It's that, to me, it just, I don't know, it doesn't work that great as a listener. And yet I know from the work that I'm getting, from the people I'm working for, from reviews, it works fine. So you have to trust that, but it's just difficult sometimes. Sometimes it just, I'll hear somebody else and I'll say, oh, there's a narrator, So the imposter syndrome is definitely part of it. Another challenge is just, finding the time and accepting the fact that that there are aspects to the job, because you're an entrepreneur, that you may not love, like marketing, specifically marketing in all VO genres. And the only reason that I think it's different in audiobooks is because it's a smaller pool of people that you need to market to.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still, you have to put yourself out there. And sometimes it's difficult.
Sometimes it's not. So this brings me to another question. I didn't mean to leap into this so early, but how did you have the nerve to start approaching people for the Speakeasy? What gave you the idea of the Speakeasy, and then how did you start asking? Because you've got quite high-profile people on the Speakeasy, and it's like a grown-up show. It's like, I mean, aside from the fact you're getting them plastered, it's like a grown-up show. You know what I mean?
I think I'm doing more of the getting plastered. They're talking so much we don't have a chance.
I don't know. They seem pretty cheerful. So tell me about the Speakeasy.
So I was starting to listen to podcasts probably 6-8 years ago, and I only listened to a couple. And then I got into narration, and I thought, well, and it actually took me a long time to think of it. It's kind of embarrassing. I was, doing audiobook narration for probably a year before I even thought of looking for a podcast about audiobooks. So I searched for podcasts about audiobooks, and they were all about audiobooks, not about the audiobook industry and about narration. And I thought, well, I could listen to that, but I'm not really looking for recommendations. I mean, that's good to have, but that's not really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for people who do this for a job so that I can learn from them, right? And I couldn't find anything. And so I thought, I got a microphone. I guess I could just do it myself. And so that was early 2017, I think. And then I went to my first APAC in 2017. So I had, probably 6 months, at least four or 5 months, maybe longer, to think about it, to kind of let it percolate. And I didn't do anything. I didn't set up any hosting. I didn't approach anybody before that APAC and say, would you do this if I did this podcast? But I'd had enough time to think about it, to think, I think I do want to do this. And I would keep searching and looking for things where something like that format. And I just never found anything. So when I was at APAC, I went to Johnny's workshop the day before. And then I went to the pre-APAC social. And Scott Brick was there. I thought, that's Scott Brick. I'd never met him. I certainly knew his name. Who doesn't know Scott Brick's name, right? And Barbara Rosenblatt was actually standing right there as well. And so Scott just was so friendly. I walk up to this guy who I've never met before, and he's just so friendly, just like, we're just having a conversation here, just a normal guy, everything's fine. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to broach this topic with somebody other than my wife, who's actually in the industry. And I said, so Scott, I wanted to ask you something. I've been thinking about doing a podcast on audiobooks because I haven't found what I'm looking for in terms of information coming in that I can learn from. And so I thought it might be nice to, interview people, talk to them. And he said, I think that would be great. But you know what I think you should do? You can go on YouTube and you can find interviews that I've done where people say, well, how did you get into narration? And that's fine. But if you could think of something to do that would be different, that would be different than just the usual, how did you get into narration? How many books have you done? What's your favorite? I think that would be a big plus. So I really took that in. And by that time, I had already thought about a bar, because I was kind of getting into amateur mixology at home. And so I said to myself, okay, now I like my idea even more in terms of the format, but I had to think about what it is that I'm going to be talking about with these people. And what I decided was, I like his idea of doing something a little bit more or a little bit different. And so that's why I always start every interview asking people about what they were doing before they were a narrator, before they were a producer. Where did they grow up? Because I think what draws people into having a conversation with somebody is commonalities. And if you find a commonality that you didn't know was there, it's like, oh, that's nice. It's not like, the answer to everything. It's just that, oh, I grew up in that town, or I went to that school too, or, just little things like that.
You want to know the person, huh? Because you
Yeah,
don't want,
exactly.
because I mean, we can look it up on Google if we want to find out how to do the job.
Exactly.
I mean, it's nice to have that in there, but you want to know the person, the
Exactly. And so,
real Rich Miller.
yeah, so, well, I don't know about that, but yeah, you want it to, it's not so much that you have to know that, it's that it makes you more comfortable. And it makes me more likely to take in information from somebody if I know something about them. And it just so happens that we have something in common, that much more likely to think, oh, what else we have in common? And so just that one little hook, I thought, well, that might help. And so then that same, I think it was probably at Johnny's, no, it was probably the next day. I don't know, I talked to Sean Pratt at some point, or actually it may have been after that, because that's when I started studying with him. I think it was right after that APAC. And I said, how would you feel about being my first guest on my podcast? And he said, sure, that'd be great. And I think he had just done another interview right before that. Of course, now, I mean, people are talking to Sean Pratt every other week, it seems like.
Because he's like the dream guest.
Yeah, he's great.
He can like run the show. I could leave and like get myself like dinner and come back, and people would be like, not even know I was gone.
No, we wouldn't know you were gone. But he is a great guest. He's a great speaker. And he's also, so I mean, like so many people in this industry who are way high up the ladder, who are just nice, friendly people that you can talk to. So he said, yeah, that would be great. And so I talked to him, and kind of the rest is history. I think that first episode is still and has been for a long time the most downloaded. People want to hear from Sean.
Yeah, it's the Sean effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, he posted, I said to him the last time, he posted about his YouTube video that he'd done, the first one he'd done. Mm-hmm. And that day, I had no idea he was going to do it, right? And I don't know numbers. I was happy that like more than 7 people joined Cup of Joe. So he posted that day, and I got to tell you, I was up till like 12 midnight answering emails from all these people that were suddenly like coming from everywhere.
Yeah.
It was the first taste I'd had of what it must be like a day in the life of somebody that's not obscure.
Right. I mean, in this industry, he's a celebrity, right?
Yeah.
So it's Johnny Heller, and that's great, good for him. But it's like all these celebrities that I know are great people.
Yep.
So that's really cool.
I'm thinking that about publishers as well.
My chair's not making too much noise, but it's a squeaky chair, so it's
quiet
out here and not in the booth.
So, but I'm hearing that about publishers as well, and also Hillary Huber. I heard her interview with you, which is what made me think I really, really like her, and then get a coaching session with her. Mm. And she's like the most amazing human being on earth. But it's like, but the thing is, you've got this knack of making, maybe it is the hook in the beginning, but I think part of it is just that you're really interested in them. But you show us the best side of the people that you're interviewing. Mm. And I love that.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I love being in a position to be able to do that. Hillary's interview just astonished me when I found out that she had painted Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. I mean, who gets to do that?
Hillary Huber.
Yeah, and all kinds of other stuff too. Jamie Matler's interview, I was just blown away. This is a fascinating person, and the life experience that she's had. It's just so exciting to get to meet him and know him. And you're right, and the publishers too. It's not just the narrators, the coaches. I've loved talking to a bunch of the producers. Got another producer episode coming up soon. It's great people, a lot of fun to talk to.
So do you contact them? Are you already working with them, or are you contacting them cold contact out of the clear blue sky?
It varies. Yeah, it varies. What happened with Jessie Coghill, Bickford, Jessie Bickford at the time.
She's lovely, by the way.
She's wonderful. I met her at APAC just last year, I guess. Without one this year now, I'm kind of confused. And with 3 before that, I always forget which one it was.
Everyone's a little confused at this point.
Yeah. This year has confused everyone. Yeah, so I met her very briefly. I think it was Stephen J. Cohen who introduced me. I was just walking in the hallway, and she was standing there, and Stephen kind of moved aside and said, "Rich, you have to come in." I think it was Stephen who did that. And so I met Jessie, and then I ended up talking to her later in the day. I don't even remember. I think it was Listener's Lounge, which I just skipped, and she was sitting at a table talking to Jamie, actually. And so I said, "You mind if I join you?" And I just sat down and I got to chat with these people. They were mostly chatting amongst themselves, but they certainly were nice and everything. That was where I met Christine Bam. She walked up to the table to talk to Jessie, and Jamie, and Jamie was the one who said, "You should talk to Christine." And so I got Christine's information, and that was how I knew to contact her. So some of it is kind of that networking thing. Some of it is I hear something about somebody in the industry, either on Facebook or through Publishers Weekly email that I get or someplace else, and I say, they look like they'd be a good candidate for the Speakeasy. I think they'd have something that narrators would be interested in hearing, and so I just figure out where to contact them and send an email. I just contacted somebody on Facebook last night that I contacted a year ago, but the timing wasn't good for her, and she's in the romance community. She's not a narrator, she's not a producer, but there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be interested in hearing her thoughts on audiobooks. And so I sent her a Facebook message last night at 11 o'clock or something like that. She happened to be online. She answered and said, "Sure, why not?" So she'll be on soon. So it's a variety of different ways that I contact people, and sometimes people contact me. Several times people have contacted me. I feel bad because I don't mean it, generally speaking, to be a show just to highlight a narrator. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's great to get to know narrators, who are coming up, who are doing this or that. That's fine. But my goal, in addition to a place where narrators could learn about the industry, was and still is a place where narrators can learn of resources that may be of value to them, whether that's coaching or learning something about a producer who they want to contact, or listeners.
Something I can reach for.
Yeah, and so where was I going with that? You have to
I interrupted you. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So part of my goal,
people contacted you. You were saying.
Yeah. So part of my goal was, introducing people to resources. And so I don't really think of it all that much as a narrator introduction kind of thing. And again, not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's not really the way I think of it. And so several people have contacted me, and I've had to say, I don't really think it's a good fit. But other people have contacted me, like my next episode coming up is a freelance producer. And she's worked with Macmillan, and she kind of had an interesting story. And so I thought, yeah, sure, I think that is somebody who narrators would like to hear from, because she can provide them with information that could be helpful.
And you do have to, I think you have to protect there's a bubble of people's expectations from what you've delivered so far, and it's nothing to do with level or how good you are or how bad you are. It's to do with your show offers a certain amount of, aside from getting to know a person that you might not get to know in the industry, but also there's a level of learning and, as you said, resources, and you have to kind of protect that, because every single one, we're all kind of marketing savvy these days, I've noticed. So anytime anybody has a chance, you'll have 80 billion narrators on your show, and we love each other and we love to listen to each other, but that takes away from the point of your show.
Yeah, or it changes it, and I'm not at a place where I really want to change it in that way right now. So that's why I try to keep it that way, with the mix of narrator coaches, engineers, producers, directors. I really like hearing from the directors and from the producers. What do you do? How do you approach all of these different things that you have to put together? more so for the producers than the directors, because the directors, it's more, okay, you're focused on the actual text, but for the producers, it's like, if you go through the casting, you have to consider all the people who are applying for the job, and then you have to look at scheduling, and then you have to look at getting the right director to work with this person if you're getting a director. So I always find those conversations really interesting personally.
Have you, I've got a suggestion of a coach. You probably already had them. I'll tell you later. I'm not going to put you on the spot, or her. She'll kill me. But if you haven't already had her, she's amazing guest, and she's a coach
tell me,
and a director.
I don't mind being put on.
Helen Lloyd.
Oh, she was on. Yeah, I talked to Helen.
I
think it was earlier this year.
That one. Okay, I'll look it up.
I think it was earlier this year.
She's amazing, isn't she?
Helen was great. Yeah, I really enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah. Okay, so this is where this has brought me from where you are now. So what have you learned from when you started the podcast, right, to now that you wouldn't have learned just as a narrator plugging along doing your books? What things have you personally taken from it that have been like a surprise to you, or that have maybe caused you to take a leap in your career or change your mindset about something in this job?
So that's a great question that I'm going to have to think about. I'm sure that the answer is not nothing, but I don't know what the answer is really. I have to think about, because, you know, it all blends together at some point. It's like, okay, so I'm narrating, I'm sending emails to publishers, I'm sending emails to rights holders, I'm narrating, I'm uploading files, I'm running a podcast, I'm contacting people about being on the podcast. And so that all kind of runs together. What I would have to do, and I don't think it's fair to do it right now while we're talking, is to go back through the episodes that are listed on the webpage for the podcast, and actually think about each one of those interviews and think, so what did I learn from that person that I've actually taken and has been super beneficial going forward? And like I said, I'm sure that the answer is not nothing. There I'm sure are several things that have been really helpful, not just making the contacts. And make no mistake, I knew when I started the podcast that a side effect would hopefully be, that I would meet people that could help me as well. Right, that wasn't the reason that I started it, but I recognized that, and I liked the fact that that was a potential benefit. I thought that this could be good for me. That's great. So I don't want to make it sound like, you know, oh, it's all selfless and I never meant to get anything out of it. I mean, I understood that was a potential side effect, but in terms of all of the specific things, I'm just not sure exactly.
Yeah, I'm not really looking for specifics, really. I'm fascinated by, and I asked Johnny Heller something along these lines, and I asked Sean as well. I'm fascinated by, because we change, right? And we grow, and we have little milestones and little aha moments. And I think when somebody does something like you've done with this podcast, you've changed probably exponentially as compared to how you would have changed if you had stayed.
I think you're probably right.
And you look back at the narrator you were predating the podcast, and it's a difficult one, because you are who you are now, so it's hard to recognize who we were then. But
you don't see the changes along the way.
I'm fascinated by what you, Rich, Speakeasy podcast host extraordinaire, would say to Rich, who was kind of biting his nails thinking, should I approach Scott Brick at the APAC event? Like, what would you teach your past self?
Well, that does make me think that one thing is the value of confidence. And it's not the value of confidence that is based on nothing. It's the value of confidence based on research and knowing what it is that you're getting into, no matter what that is. So in the audiobook world, I feel like I have gained I have greatly improved on my ability to reach out and talk to people as a professional. So I was nervous going up to Scott Brick, right? And now, if we ever have an APAC in person again, I'm not going to feel nervous about that because not just because of the amount of time that I've been doing it now, but because I have done enough research and I have met enough people to understand that it's okay to be yourself. In fact, it's great to be yourself. It's exactly what you should do. You're not, a narrator. You're Daniela. You're not just an engineer. You are the person behind the work, right? You are not your work. You are you, and work is just something that you're doing. And it's great to do that. Once you learn about what it is that you want to get into, be confident. Go up and talk to people who are doing that same thing. Feel comfortable, and that will go a long ways towards having a very profitable, and I don't mean necessarily monetarily, but having a profitable discussion, conversation, meeting, whatever it is. So I would say that is one thing. After having done this now, I do feel very comfortable approaching people to be on the podcast or that I might want to work with or whatever it is, because I have a good foundation before going to them, knowing what it is that I'm trying to accomplish and knowing about the industry and knowing about what they do and stuff like that. Because I've done whatever the research is, I can go into that conversation, very comfortable. So that is I think an important point.
That's the change. And you know what that highlights? And it drives me crazy because I think there's no cheat. There's no quick I'm going to tell past Johnny, this is the trick. There's no trick. It's you have to put in 3 years worth of work to gain the confidence. And I think that's pretty much what Johnny Heller and Sean both said as well. You have to go through the time to change, to be the new person. We always want the fast track. I tend to want somebody just tell me the secret so I can skip over all this mindset crap. I do have a question.
That's interesting. If I could comment on that.
Yes.
I think that we all feel that way at some point.
Yeah.
And I would say that over the course of this part of my career, the audiobook part, I think that has been a great lesson overall. I won't say that that's because of the podcast that I'm doing, but I would say that a great lesson overall that I think is easier for me to accept now is there is no overnight success. There is no easy answer. I won't say that I'm great at always accepting it now. I'm sure that there are still going to be times when I still am going to want that. But as I'm wanting it, I'm going to think to myself, that's not going to happen though, is it? Because I understand that now.
Because weren't you the one that, I've got a question I will definitely get to in a second, but I don't want to lose this thought. I think you posted on Facebook years ago, and it might not have been you, that you'd been really busy for a while. Was it someone else that you'd been really busy for a while? So then you got tired or you got behind, so you didn't audition so much. And then you said, this was when you were first starting, and you suddenly had an unpleasant surprise where you're like, I don't have as much booked coming up. And a lot of people come to me with that. And I'm wondering if you have how you got through that and how you've avoided it. It was you, wasn't it?
Well, I'm not sure because I don't know specifically what you're thinking of, but I will say that has happened to me actually several times now. The most recent time, I was fortunate enough to where work found me after a period of time when I wasn't, and that's a lesson that I've learned, again, not so much from the podcast, but from being an entrepreneur. This is a business. Anybody who's going into this thinking I'm going to do this full time without understanding the implications of running your own business is going to be in for a rude awakening. Because it's kind of a lesson that I learned when we had our bathroom remodeled. We had a contractor come over here. This was 8 years ago. I had a contractor come over here, and great guy. Oh, we'll get this done in this amount of time. Everything's great. We're going to do it this way. You're going to love this. You need to pick out the tile. Everything's great. So we got everything rolling, and then the job started. And after a week, all of a sudden, nobody showed up one day, and it was like, so what happened there? Oh, well, they were working on something else. They're going to be back on Wednesday. Okay, well, it's Monday, so nothing's happening for 2 days. Okay, well, they got tied up with something else. Okay, the job ended up taking, we think, about 3 or 4 weeks longer than it should have. And I started to understand at that point, not fully understanding it until I was the entrepreneur, but I started to understand at that point that 80% of your time is out looking for work, 20% of your time is actually doing the work. Sometimes in other genres of voiceover, I think it's more like 90-10 or worse. And so that was a hard lesson to learn that I have relearned or not relearned several times now. The most recent one was this year, and it was the most difficult book that I've had to do because of pronunciations. It was probably taking me twice as long to record as most other stuff that I've done. And I had this other deadline and something else. And so I did no contacting of anybody, going to ACX or anything. I was just working on these books. And I got done with them. I was like, whew. And then I had like 3 weeks where I wasn't narrating at all. And so fortunately, it wasn't a huge financial burden, but it was something that made me think, oh no, having a week off was great. Having 3 weeks off, stretching into 4 weeks off, now I'm looking at, okay, I made a mistake. I made the same mistake. But I got very fortunate in that right about that time, work found me a few times. And so I was able to take the work that found me and then start the process of, regularly going out and looking for work again. It's just kind of a rude awakening if you've never run a business before, that you always have to keep in mind that you always have to be looking towards the future while you are working in the present.
And don't get, because you know what, so many people do this, and I was so guilty of this. The minute it starts to look like it's a little too far ahead that it's empty, I would start picking the low-hanging fruit. Taking jobs that I knew better than to take.
Yeah, you don't want to do that.
Were going to kill me, that I knew were going to be a mistake. And then guess what happens the minute you've booked up on like 3 of those jobs you shouldn't have taken? The good job, not that those jobs aren't good, they're good, but they all have their challenges.
Yep.
And then the high-paying, other jobs come along.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, you're back in, okay, I can make this work if I just do 6 finished hours every single day.
Exactly. And while you're doing it, you're thinking that other job I would be having to do half as much work for that other job that I would like more than this one.
If I just held on for one day and not said yes to a job that I knew I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
But, okay, so we do have a question. I haven't forgotten you, Fiona. Have you ever had a bad experience when approaching someone, and what did you learn from this experience? I'm assuming she means for Speakeasy, which might help us new narrators. Fiona, do you mean approaching someone as a guest for Speakeasy or for narration for a job?
So I'll let her answer, but I'll answer it as for the Speakeasy part of it anyway. I've never had a bad experience contacting somebody. I have had a few experiences where people didn't reply. I've had a couple of experiences where somebody replied and then I got back to them to try to set up a date and then they didn't reply. They kind of, I guess you could say they ghosted me. I tend to take the more charitable view that they were busy and it's a low priority. For somebody who's busy, right, it's a low priority to do a free interview on a podcast. I don't pay any of my guests. And so it's a low priority to actually take the time to do that. Yeah. And I did have one experience or two that kind of surprised me a little, where I contacted somebody and they came back and they said, oh, that sounds really interesting. What would you do? What would you be asking about? And I gave them a long detail or semi-detailed email response. And they got back to me and said, okay, yeah, this sounds great. Let me run it by my legal department, because it was for a bigger company. And then they, in one case, they didn't get back. Actually, in both cases, they didn't get back to me at all. And I thought, really? So what legal department is going to have a problem with just a chat?
They definitely wouldn't want to do Cup of Joe, because I'd be like, all your family's dirty secret.
So I was a little surprised, but again, I tried to take the charitable view and I figured, okay, these companies are big. They have legal departments for a reason. The legal department is going to err on the side of caution. They're going to be worried that somebody is going to be on a show where there's alcohol, and somebody's going to complain about the fact that you're promoting alcoholism, or not, just drinking alcohol. They're going to be on a show and maybe they're going to have too much to drink, and they're going to say something that should have been kept private within the company. They're going to, so, all these different reasons. And I thought, okay, that's fine. So I haven't had people on from a couple of different companies for that reason. Maybe that'll change at some point. I'm still in contact with one of those companies. And so at some point I'll raise the idea again and see if anybody can come on, or see if they've had any changes. But it's, one of those things. I would say that's about the worst experience I've had. And it's really not that bad. I've never had anybody think that it would be a really bad idea or give me any serious negative criticism about the podcast to make me question, what am I doing here? So
I think if your intentions are transparent and you're honest, I mean, because people want to tell their story, and it's good for their business as well. And if your intentions are transparent and you're obviously coming from I have a question I saved up from earlier.
Okay.
You mentioned that you mentioned marketing as not your top superpower or favorite thing to do, but isn't all the networking you're doing and Speakeasy, isn't it? Because I preface this with, I noticed something on the call with Sean recently, the one with Sean and Anna, that I didn't realize that since I've been doing the Cup of Joe for the last few months, anytime I want to avoid marketing, I just market Cup of Joe guests. It's much easier to brag about, look at the amazing Sean and Anna, and then I never put anything out about any of my own work anymore. I've noticed that. So now I made a rule that anytime I send out a post about a Cup of Joe thing, I have to post about myself as well, because who's to blame then if the publishers look on my social media and I just look like an admin for something called Cup of Joe they don't know about, and is she even a narrator? So, but your networking, what is the difference and the line between your networking for Speakeasy and you as Rich Miller and your profile and the work you do connecting with people, which is a lot of work, and marketing per se?
For me personally, and I don't know if this is the way it should be or the way it shouldn't be, but for me personally, it's a pretty blurry line. I look at it as for audiobooks specifically, there is marketing involved, but it's quite different in my experience from marketing for, or at least somewhat different, marketing for other VO genres. Other VO genres, the whole point is to, I mean, they're all relationship businesses, and yet I think that in other genres of VO and in a lot of other businesses, it seems like it's more getting your name to as many people as possible to begin with, and then hope that a relationship develops. And in audiobooks, it feels to me a little more like try to make a relationship and then see if any work comes out of it.
Yep, that's right. That's really good.
And so for me, in this business, it feels like all of that networking kind of is the marketing, but it's in a different way. It's just trying to get to know people, and if there's anything that I can do to help them in some way, all the better.
Okay, I won't be greedy. Someone else has another question for you. I really like that. I hadn't thought of it that way because I didn't get along with the marketing in voiceover. It felt very cutthroat. And I just couldn't, after a while, I just couldn't be bothered doing it.
I hear you.
Audiobook sucks you in, doesn't it?
Yeah, it much more easily, at least for me, once I got to that confidence and comfort level of understanding that as long as I do my homework beforehand and, reach out to the right people with, like you said, transparent motives, it feels much more comfortable. I don't think that marketing for other VO genres has to be cutthroat. it's just different. It just
Yeah.
needs to be because of the nature of the business, I think.
Okay, so I have another question from Rebecca. Oh, okay.
Or somebody else.
No. It's come through. I just want to make sure, am I supposed to ask it? Because it's come through. I'm sure it's come through. It's a very simple question. What genre do you most enjoy narrating, and what genre do you enjoy reading or listening to in your free time? And has what you've read on your own time changed since you started narrating?
Yes, what I read on my own time has gone down to almost zero. Because I'm
Because
either
it's part of the job. It's
yeah,
like,
because I'm either it's I have to say it's one of the things that kind of sucks about the job is that it's a two-edged sword because I feel like stuff that I might otherwise be interested in reading, I don't have time to read because I'm pre-reading the stuff that I'm going to narrate, or I'm narrating the stuff that I'm narrating. Um, so it has changed quite a bit in that way. I've got a book that my sister-in-law gave me, I think 2 years ago for Christmas about termites that I think is fascinating, and I'm still on like chapter 3.
have you
Um,
noticed since becoming a narrator, you get books as gifts from people all the time? They think, oh, they do books, and you don't want to tell them.
yep,
I can't imagine having time to read a book
yep, it
aside from
is.
the ones that I've got to work for.
It really sucks. But I would say that the other edge of that two-edged sword is that I have gotten to read books that I have really liked that I never would have found,
Yeah.
and that has been great. So the genres that I like narrating the most, I would say, are I would pick from the favorite books that I have narrated, which were all three of them were royalty share. None of them have earned out, and I'm still so glad that I did them
Wow.
because they gave me something for my portfolio. They allowed me to read something that I really enjoyed. They allowed me to inhabit characters that I thought were fascinating characters written by incredibly skilled writers. So the first one of those was actually one of my, I think it was like my fourth book or something like that. It was really early on. It's called The Zombie Sheriff Takes Tucson, a love story.
Wait. The zombie sheriff
Takes
takes.
Tucson, a love story. And the reason that I auditioned for it was because I live in Tucson. So I thought, wow, I have to audition for this, right? And it turns out that this guy, although he lived in Chicago, actually had never been to Tucson, but he researched it and he made reference to a few places that I'm aware of, right? I thought it was a hysterically funny comedic horror novel that was a love story between zombies. And so it was really fun. Um, and then the next one was called Currency of Souls by Keelan Patrick Burke, who's a horror writer. And it was one of those books where by the time I started pre-reading, and I will be totally upfront and honest, my least favorite part of this job is prep. I would love to be able to, for every book, go into the booth and just read. I hate the time that has to be spent, but it has to be spent, right? I mean, it has to be. You have to do it. So I started reading this book, and it was a royalty share with a long deadline, and I got busy with something else, and I put it aside. And then I got back to it at some point because my deadline was getting closer, and I knew that I had to read it. And the more I read, the more I thought, oh, this is good. And the farther I got into it, the more I thought, this is great. This is a character study of multiple different characters that these are fascinating people with backstories and with things that are happening to them. It's kind of a
Wow.
fantasy horror. It's not like a blood and guts horror. It's horror, but it's psychological fantasy kind of stuff
Wow.
that's just weird. And by the end of the book, there's a kind of a climax scene, and this very important thing happens. And I was practically crying as I was reading this book because it was such an intensely emotional scene. And by the time I finished it, I thought, oh my God, I gotta get in the booth. I gotta narrate this. I get to do this, right?
You forget why you're there.
Yeah, this is my job. I get to narrate this. Oh, this is gonna be great. This is gonna be so much fun. And so I got into it, and I just got to inhabit this character. Most of the book is in first person, and I loved playing that character. And the same thing happened with another book, actually historical fiction that takes place right after the Civil War, called Caspian and the White Buffalo. The author is also a poet, and he paints just the most remarkably beautiful landscapes with his prose. It's a long book. It's like 15 hours, and I loved it. After I got into it, I couldn't put it down. And then I got to narrate it.
Royalty share?
Yeah. Yep. I did it. It was for Crossroad Press. I don't know how many people here know David Wilson.
They pick pretty good things, though, Crossroad Press. They don't mess around.
No.
I mean, if you're going to do a royalty show, that's a good...
It is. And people often ask that question, is this place legit? This is a 15, 20, 30-hour book, and it's royalty share. Yep, David's legit. He just has
I would trust him.
Yeah, he's got a small margin. Some of their books do very well, some don't. This was I've done a few books for him now, and this was one of them. But it's just beautiful. It's just a beautiful story. And there's a scene in it where an animal, a pet, is intentionally killed by someone. And I'll tell you, I mean, it makes sense in the story. I don't want to make it sound like that was a terrible thing to do. It absolutely makes perfect sense in the story that this thing would happen, that these people would do this. But I got to tell you, it was hard to get through that. That was one of those scenes I was narrating, and I had to stop a few times.
Yeah, I had one of those with the animal, and I didn't. If I had known about it before doing the markup, before signing, I can't even watch Disney because they always like try to hurt the animal momentarily to get you hooked.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Yeah. No, it was tough, but it was a beautiful story. I loved it.
Really?
And so I love that kind of stuff. The funny thing is that this business, if you don't have avenues that you're not willing to go down, and I've only got one, then it can take you all over the place. And that's one of the things I love about it. And last year I did more romance, I think, than anything else. This year, I think I will have done more nonfiction than anything else. And I love them both. And so that's the other side of that sword is that you get to read these books that you wouldn't have chosen. And some, there's going to be a whole ton of them that show up into that middle section of, nope, I wouldn't have chosen, and nope, I don't really care about it that much. But there are those little gems that happen every once in a while where it's like, wow. And there are other things too, not speaking more about the genre as opposed to just the book. I wanted to get into romance because it's a big subsection of audiobooks. It's a big genre. It's lucrative. And I didn't really know that much about it. So before I decided I'm absolutely going to try to shoot for this, got some coaching with Carol Monda, auditioned for a few things. One of them worked out. The more I got into romance, the more I realized, wow, I was really ignorant about romance, because I was thinking romance, yeah, well, whatever, I'm going to do it because it's another avenue and because there's a lot of money in it. And I found out romance fans are rabid, and some of these books, which I wouldn't have guessed, are really, really good. They're love stories, right? Who doesn't want a good love story? I want a good love story. And so I think that it's been a great learning experience, that there are other genres that are possible that I may not have done before that could be a good fit.
And I got to say, with the nonfiction, you obviously learned something remarkable with Sean, because when you did that back pain book, because very few, I'm not big on nonfiction audiobooks unless it's a subject that I really want to, study or learn about. But you made it interesting. You can tell you have an acting background. You told a story. You don't, you don't have to be dry.
And I think that that's one of the things that Sean's good at teaching is that, you are telling a story. It doesn't matter that it's about finance or back pain or whatever business, whatever it is, or technology. And so I actually really enjoy being able to kind of make a story out of what might be a dry subject. to some people. I really enjoy making it as conversational as possible. The other part of that was, what do I like listening to? I listen to far fewer audiobooks than I should, given the work that I do. But I am actually just the opposite. I think, I'm not sure that I enjoy it more, but I listen to more nonfiction than fiction.
Really?
I have difficulty staying focused on a story being told. There have been notable exceptions. I actually loved Ready Player One. Who was that?
They made a movie out of that, didn't they?
They did. I never saw that. I didn't know anything
I never
about
heard
it.
the book. I never listened to the book. I
think
like
it was,
psychological thrillers, and I just listen instead of sleep. I did.
Well,
There's no distractions.
I noticed that last night you did respond to me, and I thought to myself, isn't it like 3 a.m. right now?
Well, the thing is, my genre is horror thrillers and psychological thrillers. So yeah, I don't go to sleep.
I like the psychological stuff too. I've done a couple of thrillers, and I think that I think that I have a good. I think that I can do a good job with like police procedural type thriller type books. Yeah, and so that's good. Yeah, and so I feel good about those. But yeah, for listening, it's I would say that I have listened to more nonfiction. Now I have a couple of audiobooks in my queue that I've had for a long time that I haven't listened to yet, that I really want to listen to, that are fiction. And it's for specific reasons. I want to hear, how does this narrator do this type of story? You know, it's more for research. Yeah, it's more for research. Yeah. And I was actually telling somebody just the other day, I really think that in 2021, I'm going to try to set aside a work day, to just listen to audiobooks, because I'm not listening enough. I know that it's a good task. I know that it's a good work task that I'm just not doing enough of.
Do you exercise? Can you not put it on while you're exercising?
So I do. Well, so I do listen to stuff when I'm riding my bike, because I'm a cyclist, but it's too cold right now to ride. I mean, geez, we're barely hitting 60 today. And so I'm not really riding. I don't really ride during the winter. So I do, but I also listen to a lot of podcasts. And
I know, see, I do too. I'm a sucker for intermittent fasting, how to manifest yourself skinny, what are the newest health hacks, how to have your whole life in a 4-hour day.
Yeah, and I've got like, 2 or 3 or 4 topics where I listen to 2 or 3 or 4 podcasts in each topic. And it's like, I thought about it the other day. I'm going to have to do this one of these days. If I actually added it up, I swear that all of the podcasts that I'm subscribed to, and I refuse to listen at more than normal speed, would probably be 20 or 30 hours. And so that's taken up a lot of my time too. So I might try to winnow that down and actually make more time for audiobooks. It would be a smart career move.
So what are you most excited about for 2021?
I'm excited about the fact that this year was finally, for me, kind of a breakthrough year in terms of working with places that I wanted to work with that I hadn't yet. It took me a long time to get here. I started this over 6 years ago. And this year it's been going well. And every year I look at it and I say, didn't make much money, but this happened, this happened, this happened. I still think things are going in the right direction. I talk it over with my wife. She knows I hadn't been making much money at it. And this year, finally, I worked with several different places that I hadn't before, that I felt really good about working with.
That's a dream.
Yeah, and so what I'm looking forward to in 2021 is continuing that trend, continuing those relationships. And I guess my biggest takeaway from that, before I go on, would be to say to anybody who is thinking, oh my God, this is taking so long, would be to say, yeah, sometimes it really does. And that's dependent on a lot of different things. I know there are people who have gotten to where I feel like I am right now much quicker than I have. I know that there are people who have taken longer and have given up because of that, but it can take a long time. So you have to look at the big picture. You have to look at everything in your life, and you have to say, is this going in the right direction? Can I do what I'm attempting to do? Have solid goals. Can I do that in this amount of time? But for me, I'm hoping to continue that trend and work with a couple more places that I've been trying to work with, and then feel like I have a steady stream of work without having to get overbooked or being afraid of being underbooked.
So what
So
about, because I'm learning for myself, I mean, you might have already done this ages ago, but I'm a very slow learner, evidently, that that it's such a long road that I'd better damn well start to enjoy the process, which is all the schedule hygiene,
mhm.
find out how I work best, not everyone else in the world, learn to enjoy the books and remind myself to enjoy the books rather than freaking out about deadlines. And when I first started, it was, oh, the money, am I going to get paid? Now it's the, how much work am I going to get done? How organized? So really, really working on the process. And so have you hacked that? Are you happy? Because I think if you're enjoying the process, you could hang on forever. But it's the ones that are like fill our days with angst and the worrying about where we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how are you with enjoying the process?
I would say I'm about halfway there. And
Halfway is good.
a lot of that I think still has to do with recognizing when I have to take the time to try to find work and get my name out there and contact the right people, and how much of it has to be spent with the prep and how much of it is actually spent doing the recording. So I guess that all falls into scheduling, and so I think that the scheduling part of it is still probably one of my more difficult things about the work. Um, in terms of the work itself, I actually feel pretty good. Even the stuff, like I said, the nonfiction that I've done, and that I have been doing a lot of lately, that a lot of people could feel is fairly dry. I don't dislike that work. I get in the booth and I make a story out of it, and I'm being conversation with somebody who I know will get some value out of this. And so I think that all of the work, all of the actual narrating, I actually really enjoy, regardless of the topic.
Do you know why? I can tell you why. I've got you sussed.
Yeah.
Remember what I said at the top of the call about something about you coming with just the right time on Facebook, and you say just the right thing. And I think, and having listened to the Speakeasy and now having seen you and talked to you here, you think you're completely present. You think
Ooh.
about things before you say them. And that's like,
I don't know if I can go that far, but
but I can see you carefully considering. And
yeah, I do try to do that.
that is an amazing talent. Take it from someone that doesn't have even an ounce of that. It's not my nature. That's an amazing talent. That's why your people trust you and sense authenticity, because there's a second where you can see you considering what you're saying. I love that. You should have been a politician.
Yeah. God forbid.
Probably a little too honest though for
that would have been, I think that would have been a huge mistake. I am painfully honest. There have been situations where it probably would have been better to not be honest, and it's really hard for me to get away from that. That's one of the things that I got from my dad. He was honest to a fault, and
that's good in this
I am
world.
I am not ashamed of that in the least. It's just that every once in a while you get into situations where you're like, well, it would be easier if I could just lie my way out of this.
Yeah, but easy isn't good. In this world, we need more honest men and
I
women.
couldn't agree more.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's a good trait, and I think it's going to serve you well in the booth and everything, because that being present, that's my biggest struggle, literally, because my mind is always like, my mind's very duplicitous.
I know that feeling. I was just finishing up a book a day or two ago, and it was nonfiction, and something came into my head because somebody posted something on Facebook, and then I started narrating again. I make the mistake of taking a break between chapters so that I can open my booth door and get some fresh air. And while I have the door open, I go to Facebook, and I'm really attempting to pull back on social media, and I'm not succeeding right now, but it's kind of a goal of mine, because I think that there are a lot of bad things which I don't really worry about too much. I don't really take part in things that are destructive, but it is a time sink. Even if you're only focusing on good stuff, it's kind of a time sink. And so somebody posted something, and I saw a comment, and it got me, upset about something, and then I went back to narrating, and I realized within the first few sentences, shit, just focus, because you're thinking about that other thing. Just stop it. This is what you're working on now. And it took me a few minutes, but then I got back into it. So I know that feeling.
I think I might be misquoting, but I'm pretty sure it was Jennifer Blum. She had a brilliant idea. I'm not going to do it yet, but maybe someday. She said if you really want a break, she said take a whole week. I'm sorry, there's no way, but I'm thinking maybe I could take a whole day off Facebook or social media. She said you give someone that you trust, your password, so that they change your password. So because that whole taking it off your phone thing, I'm sorry, what idiot doesn't just put it back on their phone in 5 minutes?
So what I learned fairly quickly was, actually the browser version on my phone is better than the app. And so I don't have the app, but it doesn't really matter. That's actually an interesting idea. And I have taken a social media break. I think it was a year ago, for about a month, actually. I did pop on, and I checked to see if there was, somebody was sending me a message or there was something important. And then I forced myself, and I popped off really quick, and I just stayed off. And I'm thinking I need to do that again, but
I need to, maybe in 2021. Like, I don't need to know what every single one of my 380 friends had for dinner, lunch, and breakfast.
Right. And it's difficult intentionally. I mean, they do everything to make it as addictive as it is.
Yeah.
So it is difficult, but I'm still struggling with it a little. We'll see what happens. Maybe that'll be a good goal for 2021.
Well, I think compared to me, you've got the mindfulness thing cracked, Rich. I'm telling you.
Got ways to go on that, believe me.
Well, I've got one last question for you blame Sean for this one.
Okay.
What would you like to say to the YouTube audience for ad infinitum? What would you like to let them know?
To let them know about me, or about
final last words of wisdom, anything you want, networking, marketing, even if it's just listen to Speakeasy, guys.
No, I wouldn't say that. Well, I mean, I would say that, but I would say that what we touched on earlier about, I can't emphasize this enough. So when I first started in voiceover 18 or so years ago, I didn't know what I didn't know. And what I didn't know was that it's a business. And where I was taking voiceover workshops, now, of course, in 20 years, voiceover has changed a huge amount. I mean, look at audiobooks just in the past 10 years. But everything has changed in the industry in all the different genres. But at the time, it had already gone to the point where having an agent wasn't your ticket to riches. You had to market back then. It wasn't as bad as it is now, but it was much more than it had been back 20 years before that. Back in the 70s and 80s, it was, you have to have an agent. You have to be available all the time. And there's a very few people who do this. Now it's, everybody with a computer and a microphone. So marketing was not something that I knew that I had to do. And so I didn't do it. And I didn't get very many jobs. And that makes perfect sense, right? Now I get that. So I would make it more general, as I did before. It's just that I keep going back to it because it's so important. I see so many comments in the Facebook groups where people who are just trying this don't understand how important it is that if you are going into this and you're not thinking of it as a hobby and you're not thinking of it as, well, just something to make a few extra bucks, if you're actually thinking about going into this and saying, can I really make a living at this? Understand that you are starting a solo business. It's you have to do everything. And it's not as easy as, oh, look, there's an audition. I'll do an audition on ACX. I mean, it's horrifying. You can't stop there. You can't stop there.
Yeah.
People actually do this all the time. Yeah, people do this all the time, and it can be, well, more than what you need to pay your bills and whatever. But you have to understand that going in. And so if you do just want to make it a hobby or an avocation or something that you do in your spare time, and you're not really all that concerned about making a huge amount of money, you want to make some money, that's great. Here are some good tips for doing that. But if it's only that, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you actually are thinking about making this a full-time career and you're looking at it as a way to make X amount of dollars, boy, get your ducks in a row. Understand everything, not just how to narrate, which is a big, huge part of it because you have to be able to do the work, but understand that it's a business and there are so many things to running a business in terms of being in touch with your suppliers, keeping in touch with your customers, keeping in touch with the people who are going to hire you, doing good work, keeping up with things, learning more as things change. I mean, look at how audiobooks are now compared to what they were maybe 10 years ago, or more like 20 years ago, where everything was very flat. Everything was, more like a reporting than telling a story. Now the performance is different. Look at things that are changing. Look at full cast audio productions. Everything changes. Keep up with those changes. Understand that you are in an industry
Constantly.
and
the new
be
people,
aware.
can I just say for the new people, because it took me 4 years and getting gravely ill to learn this lesson, just working 7 days a week is not a good business plan.
Yes.
Because you think I'm going to work more and then I'll make more money and I'll charge less because I don't have the nerve to ask for more. So I'll just overwork everyone. It's impossible. There are 8,000 other people trying to overwork you. You will never catch up. You will get sick. And then guess what's the first thing to go? Your voice.
Your voice. Yes, and to add on to that, I completely agree. And one of the reasons that it's taken me so long is that I was not willing to overbook to the point of exhaustion. And there are a number of reasons for that don't really matter, my own personal situation. But I hear the stories of people, well, I did, 340 books last year and I slept 2 hours a night. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but
not much.
Yeah, but I just think, okay, that's a choice, and I'm not going to tell you you're wrong because you get to make that choice. It's your life. Really think about those choices before you put yourself in a situation where you could damage your voice, or you could alienate your family, or you could make yourself sick in other ways. That's all part of being an entrepreneur and running a business. Actually, some of the nonfiction that I've done lately is business books, and some of it has been about starting your own business. And I love some of the things they say in there. It's like, it is going to be hard. Totally different industry. And they're saying, it is going to be hard. You need to understand these things before you commit to, I can do this full time. This is going to be my living. Yes, that's great. If that's your goal, that's fantastic. And just make sure you understand what that entails.
And it's hard, like in a different way. It's hard in having to learn things that scare the hell out of you and step into things that are like, feel really big and could like end everything money-wise. It's that kind of hard. I thought going to be hard meant working 7 days a week. I'll just work really, really hard. That's an employee's thinking.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an employer. Like, I'm going to have an unrealistic schedule and it's all going to work out fine and I'll just take on everything. That's me showing up at the office and somebody else is like got the final hand on the bills. It's a different kind of hard.
Yep.
You think you're working hard when you're sitting up till 3 a.m. editing because you don't want to pay for an editor and you're working 7 days a week. You think you're working hard, but the hard is the risks and the paying for coaches and the editor. That's hard.
There's a lot to it.
Yeah. Thank you, Rich. I
feel
very enlightened now after our chat.
Well, I'm very happy that I could do this with you. This is great, especially after, like you said, so long ago doing that book. And there was just no way when Steve came to me and said that he wanted somebody else to read this poem. I'm like, well, who? Oh, I know that name. Okay, well, there's no way that I'm going to do that without having you credited as being part of the production.
Yeah, I didn't. It was.
I know you didn't care, but I did.
Because it's weird. It's like on my portfolio, it's got like more reviews than like any book I've done, and I'm like, I literally said like 3 lines. I mean, I'm
But you
not
said them
complaining.
so well.
Thanks so much, Rich. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure for me too. Thanks, Daniela.
See you later, and bye, guys. Thanks everyone for joining. Bye.
Hey.
Bye.